let's say Microsoft got Windows up and running, fully optimized on ARM. What does that mean? Laptops get cheaper and more efficient. We get a killer laptop SoC. The X-Boy gets closer to becoming a reality. Windows CE makes a dramatic comeback. Nah. We'd love your prognostications on the potentials. Curious about your thoughts about this one, Oliver, because obviously you've moved through a transition from x86 to ARM on the Mac side.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this?
Well, I think in terms of the general characteristics of ARM chips, what you get is you get much better idle power. You can get much better battery life in a lot of circumstances. I think we see that on the Surface devices now, on the devices with the Snapdragon X Elite in Windows. But I think it's less the case that you get markedly better performance when under load or better efficiency there, depending on the actual core itself. Because that really does depend on the core more than the architecture or general characteristics of ARM chips. So it really depends on how good those ARM chips are. Now with Apple, I think when they made that transition, they were able to design cores that were much better for their devices than the Intel chips they were using previously, in terms of that CPU core architecture, because the Intel CPU cores were very power hungry and not well suited for mobile architectures, and they were having a lot of issues with like throttling on all my MacBooks going back to 2015. I had horrible throttling on all of them. Like the CPU clock speed would go below 2 gigahertz under load. It was quite horrible, and that was addressed comprehensively with the M series chips because they're able to maintain good clock speeds at reasonable levels of power consumption. But I think they were able to build out large chips with those CPU cores and their smaller CPU cores as well. And then they were able to attach big GPUs to those CPU cores with an SoC with a big memory interface with lots of bandwidth. So maybe they would have had a good result also if they'd gone with AMD and they had a big memory interface with lots of bandwidth and a big GPU and AMD CPU IP in there. I'm not exactly sure how much of a difference that would have made to the actual performance of those devices. I think for power consumption, going to those ARM cores is very important because of how effective the power gating is on those cores. On the Snapdragon X Elite side of things, I think what you see with those CPU cores is that they're, under load, they're reasonably competitive with the x86 counterparts that they do have, but they're not giving you a markedly different battery life experience when they're actually being stressed.
Mm. Mm-hmm. How do I tackle this one? I think one of the big things about it is that the ARM processor cores are actually less complex than x86, and certainly when you're making a console, die size is everything. Area costs a lot of money when you're making, whatever, let's say 120 million consoles. So, there's certainly going to be efficiencies there. There'll be efficiencies in power consumption, which I think is just generally a great thing. And in terms of the impact on gaming, I'm not sure there will be an impact in gaming on the console side because, Switch has got pretty poor CPU cores and it seems to cope generally all right. So I think it's just going to be more of an efficiency play. I'm just curious to see what's going to happen with x86 going forward. Just more holistically across the whole range, what's going to happen there? Does x86 become like sort of super high-end performance and gaming orientated? Will the gaming side of things, will ARM catch up there? I just don't really know. I don't think Windows CE is going to be making a comeback. The X-Boy is certainly interesting, but I think they want to get that handheld out pretty soon, and gaming on ARM is just not there yet. So maybe next generation. Laptops get cheaper, more efficient, certainly more efficient. Not sure about cheaper.
No.
Wait and see. I mean, the one thing about these chips is that they are on really low, really recent fabrication nodes. Therefore, they still are quite expensive. But that's kind of about it. Hopefully, you shouldn't really see that much of a sort of disruption in the transition. Hopefully, x86 and ARM will live side by side, and I guess it's down to the long term to see what the fortunes of x86 are. Alex, any ideas?
I mean, I think x86 is in an amazing place beyond Intel at the moment. I think AMD knows what they're doing, and they have like a roadmap and they've had it for a while, and they're just going to keep pushing for it. I think Intel, it seems a little reactive at times, and it seems like their inability to get like power, and them just keeping pushing power, and then also not necessarily working on the lowest, smallest nodes like AMD or ARM and
There's
Apple
the whole
have access to.
stability issue right now as well.
The
with
stability
13.
issue is just like, this is like completely unacceptable. Like, like right now I'm loving the 7800X3D. I don't want to say I haven't had any issues with AM5. I think the CPU is good, but I've had issues with my platform, regardless of that. But I think just like Intel really needs to like, I'm going to say I feel a lot more comfortable about x86's future as soon as Intel gets a chip that is competitive without being like a billion watts and who doesn't have any hardware issues. Like, Rich, you've suffered from the hardware issue. Is this correct?
The very PC I'm recording this direct on is using my dodgy 13900K, and I solved the problem simply by using that Intel baseline BIOS. But without it, it's just, all bets are off. It's just completely unstable on Premiere or any sort of media production application, except weirdly enough, Handbrake, it just powers through without any problem at all there. But yeah, I mean, if you can't trust the reliability of your PC, it's really making me rethink whether my next workstation is going to be Intel or AMD. Typically I go for Intel, but what can I say? Prior to that, I had the 5950X. Do you still use that for your workstation, Alex?
I do, and
and it's still awesome, isn't it?
It's still awesome, and I think I also prefer how non-stingy AMD boards are with regards to PCIe lanes. For me, someone who uses almost all of them, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what can I say? Yeah. It's in a bad place at the moment, Intel, but AMD are great. that's the bottom line.
Yeah, just in general, this is not as applicable for desktop machines, but the power consumption of a lot of these Intel chips. I mean, even like my older 10850K, it goes to 250 watts without really me doing too much. I just touch it and it goes straight to 250. So yeah, it's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous. Obviously, for the desktops, it's not as important. But I kind of like that in AMD land, it's more reasonable. They seem to peak out at about like 140 watts in typical operation more often than not.
Yeah, it can go nutty with like AVX and whatnot. But yeah,
right,
it's generally just a better place to be. And I'll be watching with much interest if ARM can actually produce a chip that does sort of hit the performance that you kind of want from high end applications. Because Apple has managed that as well, right, Oliver?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm speaking to you right now on an M1 Mac Studio. I'll probably upgrade to an M4 Mac Studio or maybe an M5 Mac Studio when they come out with that. But this is the best computer I've ever owned by a long shot. I mean, it's super fast, super efficient. The CPU cluster in there is about, comparable to like a 12900K, but it consumes 50 watts, not 250 watts.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it's such a tiny computer and it's so much fun to use and it's super responsive. So I really couldn't be happier.